The year was 1967. America was a nation divided. The civil rights movement was in full swing, Vietnam War protests filled the streets, and a young boxer named Cassius Clay, now known as Muhammad Ali, had become more than just a heavyweight champion. He had become a voice. The Houston Armed Forces examining an entrance station buzzed with nervous energy that April morning. Young men with downcast eyes and slumped shoulders shuffled through the processing line. Draft notices had been sent and bodies were needed for a war raging halfway across the world. Among them stood Ali, tall, proud, unmistakable. But unlike the others, his presence commanded attention. At 25, he was at the peak of his career, the heavyweight champion of the world with an undefeated record of 29-0. His quick wit was as legendary as his lightning-fast jabs. "Name?" asked the military clerk, not looking up from his paperwork. "Muhammad Ali," he replied firmly. The clerk's eyes darted upward, recognition dawning. "Cassius Clay," he corrected, deliberately using Ali's birth name, not the one he had taken after converting to Islam. Ali's jaw tightened. "My name is Muhammad Ali." The clerk smirked and continued processing the paperwork. "Step forward for induction, Clay." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what was coming. For months, Ali had publicly stated his opposition to the Vietnam War. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong," he had famously declared. "No Viet Cong ever called me nigger." When his name was called for induction, Ali stood motionless. The official called again, louder this time. "Cassius Clay, step forward." Ali remained still, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Lieutenant Colonel James McKee, a white official overseeing the proceedings, approached Ali. "You realize what you're doing, boy. This is your duty. You're an American." Ali's eyes flashed. "I'm not your slave and I'm not your boy. I'm Muhammad Ali, a free man, and I will not be drafted to fight in your war." The room gasped. In 1967, America, a black man speaking to a white military official this way was unheard of. McKee's face reddened. "You'll lose everything," McKee hissed. "Your title, your money, your freedom. Is that what you want?" Ali stood taller. "I'm ready to face whatever comes. I answer to Allah, not to you." News cameras flashed outside as Ali emerged from the induction center. Reporters swarmed him, microphones thrust toward his face. "Muhammad, what happened in there?" Ali spoke clearly, each word deliberate. "I refuse to be inducted into the armed forces of the United States. I claim to be exempt as a minister of the religion of Islam." A reporter pushed forward. "Are you prepared for the consequences?" Ali's response would echo through history. "I'm ready to go to jail. I'm ready to pay the price. But I will not betray my beliefs or my people." Within hours, the news spread across America and around the world. The heavyweight champion, at the height of his powers, had just sacrificed everything on principle. That same day, the New York State Athletic Commission suspended Ali's boxing license and stripped him of his title. Other boxing commissions followed suit. In an instant, the greatest boxer in the world was banned from the sport he dominated. Back in his hotel room, Ali sat alone, phone ringing incessantly. His manager, Herbert Mohammed, entered with a grave expression. "They're saying you'll be arrested tomorrow. The government is pushing for the maximum penalty, 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine." Ali nodded solemnly. "I expected this. The press is calling you everything from a traitor to a hero," Herbert continued. "The death threats have already started coming in." Ali walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "A man who is not willing to stand for something will fall for anything. I'm standing for my people, for my faith, for what's right." Herbert placed a hand on Ali's shoulder. "This fight has just begun, champ." Ali turned, his eyes reflecting both determination and the weight of his decision. "In the ring, they call me the greatest. But this is the real test of greatness." As night fell across America, millions discussed the day's events. In barbershops and diners, in living rooms and bars, people debated, was Muhammad Ali a traitor or a hero? A coward or the bravest man in America? What no one could deny was that in that moment of defiance, when he declared, "I'm not your slave," Muhammad Ali had changed the conversation about race, war, and power in America forever, and the world was watching, stunned by what would follow. The morning after Ali's refusal to step forward, the headlines screamed across America, "Clay refuses army oath, loses title." Heavyweight champ faces prison. Ali defies draft. America divided. In a Houston courtroom on June 20, 1967, just 2 months after his stand at the induction center, Muhammad Ali sat composed as the judge read the verdict. Guilty of draft evasion. The sentence: 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, the maximum penalty. As Ali left the courthouse, a sea of reporters awaited. One shouted, "Do you regret your decision now?" Ali stopped, turning to face the cameras. "I don't regret it. I'd rather face 5 years in jail than face my God knowing I betrayed my principles. I'm giving up my title, my career, maybe my freedom, but I'm keeping my dignity and self-respect." While his legal team immediately filed an appeal that would keep him out of prison, the damage to his career was already done. Ali was 25 years old, the prime of a boxer's life, and now faced a future without boxing. The financial impact was immediate and devastating. Ali had earned millions but now found himself struggling. Endorsement deals vanished overnight. Speaking engagements were canceled. His income plummeted by an estimated 90%. "They think they hurt me by taking my title," Ali told his friend Howard Bingham as they drove through Chicago's South Side. "But a piece of paper doesn't make you a champion. What they don't understand is that the people know who the real champion is." As they stopped at a traffic light, a group of young black men recognized Ali in the passenger seat. "The champ!" they shouted, rushing to the car. "The real champ!" Ali rolled down his window, greeting them with his famous smile. One young man leaned in. "Man, what you did. Standing up to them like that. You fighting for all of us." These moments sustained Ali through the darkest times. While the boxing establishment had abandoned him, the streets embraced him as something more than a champion, as a symbol of resistance. Not everyone supported Ali's stance, however. Hate mail poured in by the bagful. Death threats became so common that Ali's security team had to be expanded. Former supporters turned their backs. Even some civil rights leaders, concerned about the backlash, distanced themselves from his anti-war position. Joe Louis, the former heavyweight champion who had served in the military during World War II, publicly criticized Ali. "In this country, you have to serve when called." Ali's response was characteristically sharp. "I'm not trying to dodge the draft. I'm just trying to dodge bullets. Why should I go 10,000 miles from home to drop bombs and bullets on brown people in Vietnam, while so-called Negro people in Louisville are treated like dogs?" The exile from boxing hit hardest. For a man whose identity had been forged in the ring, being banned from his profession was like losing a limb. Ali's body, once a finely tuned instrument of athletic perfection, began to change without the rigorous training regimen of a professional fighter. One afternoon, Ali's wife Belinda found him shadowboxing in front of a mirror, sweat pouring down his face after 2 hours of solitary training. "Why do you still train so hard?" she asked. "You don't know when they'll let you fight again." Ali didn't stop his movement, his reflection throwing perfect combinations. "Because I am still the champion. And when this is over, not if, but when, I need to be ready." As 1968 turned to 1969, and then to 1970, Ali's case wound its way through the appeals process. During this time, he supported his family by speaking at colleges, one of the few venues still willing to host him. What began as a financial necessity became a platform for Ali to articulate his views on race, religion, and the war. At a time when most athletes carefully avoided political statements, Ali was unflinching. At Michigan State University, speaking to a packed auditorium, he delivered one of his most powerful speeches. "They call me the Louisville Lip. They say I talk too much. But I learned something. When you got something important to say, you better talk. You better not be quiet. Because being quiet is what they want from us. They want us to shut up and fight their wars, shine their shoes, and say yes, sir, and no, sir. Well, I ain't shutting up." The crowd erupted in applause. College campuses, already centers of anti-war activism, embraced Ali as a hero. A new generation was listening to him, not just as a boxer, but as a voice of moral clarity. Meanwhile, the war in Vietnam grew increasingly unpopular. The death toll mounted, and Americans began questioning why their sons were dying in a distant conflict. Public opinion, once overwhelmingly against Ali, began to shift. In a quiet moment with Howard Cosell, the sportscaster who had stood by him when others wouldn't, Ali reflected on the change. 3 years ago, they called me a traitor. Now they're asking if I was right all along. Cosell, never one to mince words, replied. That's because you were ahead of your time, Muhammad. The country is catching up to you. Ali nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes a man has to stand alone before others find the courage to stand with him. As the legal battle continued, Ali found unexpected allies. Former opponents like Floyd Patterson, who had once vowed to bring the title back to America by defeating Ali, now publicly supported his right to follow his conscience. Even as Ali's professional life remained in limbo, his personal convictions never wavered. When asked if he would make the same choice again, knowing the consequences, his answer was immediate. In a heartbeat. Some things are worth more than money, more than fame, more than a championship belt. Some things are worth everything. By 1970, 3.5 years into his boxing exile, the world Muhammad Ali had defied was beginning to change. The anti-war movement had grown from a fringe position to a mainstream view. The fight for civil rights had evolved into a broader struggle for human dignity, and a man who had been vilified for saying, "I'm not your slave," to a white official, was increasingly seen not as a draft dodger, but as a man of principle who had sacrificed everything for his beliefs. The price had been enormous. Millions in lost income, the prime years of his athletic career, and public vilification. But as Ali often said, quoting his spiritual teacher Elijah Muhammad, a man who won't stand for something will fall for anything. And Muhammad Ali was still standing. On June 28, 1971, the marble halls of the United States Supreme Court fell silent as the 9 justices prepared to announce their decision in Clay v. United States. After 4 years of legal battles, Muhammad Ali's case had reached the highest court in the land. Ali sat motionless beside his attorney Chauncey Eskridge as Chief Justice Warren Burger began to speak. The journey to this moment had been long and uncertain. Just months earlier, Ali had finally returned to boxing after a Georgia state senator helped arrange a fight in Atlanta, where there was no boxing commission to enforce the nationwide ban. His comeback bout against Jerry Quarry in October 1970 had ended in victory, but his legal status remained unresolved. He could still be sent to prison at any moment. Now everything hinged on the Supreme Court's interpretation of Ali's religious objection to military service. In this case, Chief Justice Burger announced, the court unanimously agrees that the conviction should be reversed. The decision was 8-0 in Ali's favor. The justices had found that the government had wrongly denied Ali's claim for conscientious objector status based on his religious beliefs. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Ali. "Muhammad, what's your reaction to the verdict?" Ali's face, usually animated and expressive, was solemn. "I thank Allah for this victory. I've fought my hardest fight outside the ring, not inside it." A reporter pressed, "Do you feel vindicated?" Ali paused, considering the question. "I don't need vindication from the same system that tried to destroy me, but I'm grateful that justice finally prevailed." The Supreme Court victory meant Ali would not go to prison. His boxing license was restored. But the 4 years of exile, from age 25 to 29, had cost him dearly. These should have been his peak physical years as an athlete. In his first training session after the verdict, Ali worked with his longtime trainer Angelo Dundee. As Ali hit the heavy bag, Dundee noticed subtle changes in his fighter's once perfect form. "Your timing's a little off, champ," Dundee said gently. "Those years away, they took something." Ali paused, breathing heavily. "Then we'll just have to find a new way to win." The boxing world had changed during Ali's absence. A new champion had emerged, Joe Frazier, an undefeated powerhouse with a devastating left hook. While Ali had been fighting in courtrooms, Frazier had been destroying opponents in the ring. The stage was set for what would become known as the fight of the century, Ali versus Frazier at Madison Square Garden on March 8, 1971. This fight, which actually took place before the Supreme Court decision, represented Ali's chance to reclaim what he had never lost in the ring. The buildup was intense. Ali, ever the master of psychological warfare, taunted Frazier relentlessly, calling him the gorilla and Uncle Tom, attempting to paint Frazier as a tool of the white establishment. These tactics, which had worked on previous opponents, backfired with Frazier. Born into poverty in South Carolina, Frazier had fought his way up through sheer determination. He had even supported Ali financially during his exile. Now, he felt betrayed by Ali's insults. "I want to hurt him," Frazier told reporters. "Not just beat him, hurt him. The night of the fight, Madison Square Garden was electric. Frank Sinatra, unable to secure a ringside seat even with his celebrity status, worked as a photographer for Life magazine just to be close to the action. Celebrities, politicians, and everyday fans paid record prices to witness history. The fight itself was brutal. Ali, showing flashes of his old brilliance, landed clean punches throughout. But Frazier, relentless and powerful, kept coming forward. In the 15th round, Frazier landed a thunderous left hook that sent Ali crashing to the canvas. Only the third time in his career he had been knocked down. Ali rose quickly, but the damage was done. When the judge's decision was announced, a unanimous victory for Frazier, Ali faced his first professional defeat. In his dressing room afterward, surrounded by his team, Ali sat in silence, his face swollen from Frazier's punches. "We'll get him next time, champ," Bundini Brown, his assistant trainer, offered. Ali nodded slowly. "This isn't over. My story isn't finished." The loss to Frazier was painful, but in many ways, Ali's greatest victories had already been won outside the ring. The Supreme Court decision had validated what he had maintained all along, that his religious objection to the war was sincere and should have been respected. More importantly, public opinion had shifted dramatically. The same man who had been denounced as a traitor in 1967 was increasingly viewed as a hero by 1971. His principled stand against the Vietnam War, once seen as radical, now aligned with mainstream American sentiment as the war grew increasingly unpopular. In the years that followed, Ali would rebuild his boxing career, eventually reclaiming the heavyweight title in the legendary Rumble in the Jungle against George Foreman in 1974. He would complete his trilogy with Joe Frazier in the brutal Thrilla in Manila in 1975. These fights would cement his legacy as perhaps the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time. But for many, Ali's most significant fight wasn't against Frazier, Foreman, or any other boxer. It was his fight against the United States government, a fight where the stakes weren't a championship belt, but his freedom and his principles. One evening in 1972, after his legal vindication but before he had reclaimed his title, Ali sat for an interview with a young journalist who asked if he regretted the years he had lost. "Regret?" Ali repeated. "Let me tell you something about regret. Regret is when you don't stand up when you know you should. Regret is when you compromise what you believe to keep people happy. I don't have those regrets." He leaned forward, his voice quieter but intense. "They took my title, they took my money. They tried to take my dignity, but they couldn't take my integrity. And in the end, that's what matters most." As Ali rose to leave, the journalist asked one final question. "What do you want people to remember about your stand against the draft?" Ali paused at the door. "I want them to remember that one man with courage makes a majority. I want them to remember that sometimes you have to lose everything to gain something greater. And I want them to remember that when I said I'm not your slave, I wasn't just speaking for myself. I was speaking for every person who ever had to bow their head when they knew they should stand tall." With that, the man who had sacrificed everything for his principles walked out, ready to continue fighting, both in the ring and beyond it. December 1990. A 48-year-old Muhammad Ali, his body now ravaged by Parkinson's disease, walked slowly through the marbled halls of the White House. President George H.W. Bush had invited him to discuss a delicate diplomatic mission, the release of American hostages in Iraq before the impending Gulf War. As Ali waited to meet the president, a young White House aide approached him. "Mr. Ali," the aide said, "I just wanted to tell you that my father was drafted for Vietnam. He told me that your stand gave him the courage to question why he was being sent to fight." Ali's hands trembled, a symptom of his disease, but his eyes remained sharp and alert. He nodded in acknowledgement, his once booming voice now reduced to a whisper. "That's why I did it. For him. For all of them." This moment, more than 2 decades after Ali had declared "I'm not your slave" to a military official, illustrated how completely the arc of history had bent toward his position. The man once denounced as a traitor was now being deployed as a diplomatic asset by the very government that had tried to imprison him. The transformation of Ali's public image, from vilified draft resistor to beloved global humanitarian, represented one of the most remarkable rehabilitations in American cultural history. But this change said less about Ali, whose principles had remained consistent, than it did about America's evolving understanding of the Vietnam War and racial justice. In the years following his Supreme Court victory and return to boxing, Ali had rebuilt his career through sheer determination. His epic fights, the rumble in the jungle against George Foreman in Zaire, and the thriller in Manila against Joe Frazier in the Philippines, had restored his status as the greatest heavyweight of his era. But even as he reclaimed his boxing glory, Ali never retreated from his political and social convictions. When a reporter asked if he had moderated his views to become more acceptable to mainstream America, Ali's response was characteristically direct. "They didn't come to me. I didn't change. The world changed its view of the war. The world changed its view of black pride. I stood still, and the world moved toward me." By the mid-1970s, with the Vietnam War ended in defeat and the Watergate scandal eroding public trust in government, Americans increasingly recognized that Ali's defiance had been prophetic rather than treasonous. His willingness to sacrifice his career at its peak for his principles took on a new significance in a cynical age. Howard Cosell, the sportscaster who had defended Ali when others wouldn't, reflected on this transformation during Ali's retirement bout against Larry Holmes in 1980. "This man has become the most beloved athlete in the world. And we must remember that this same man was once the most hated man in America for standing on principle." What does that say about him? What does that say about us? As Ali's boxing career ended and his health declined due to Parkinson's disease, his public persona evolved. The fiery, provocative rhetoric of his youth gave way to a dignified, almost silent presence. The man who had once been the most vocal athlete in the world now communicated more through his presence than his words. This physical decline, coupled with his unwavering dignity, added another dimension to his legacy. The sight of Ali, his hands trembling as he lit the Olympic torch at the 1996 Atlanta Games, moved millions to tears. Here was a man who had sacrificed his body twice, first for his principles, losing prime years of his athletic career, and then for his sport, absorbing the punches that likely contributed to his Parkinson's. In his later years, Ali reflected on the moment that had defined his life, his refusal to step forward when drafted. During a rare interview in 2001, when asked if he would make the same decision again, the elderly Ali, his voice barely audible, leaned forward and said with surprising clarity, "In a heartbeat, some things are worth more than money and titles. Some things are worth everything." Ali's stand had ripple effects far beyond his own life. His example inspired other athletes to use their platforms for social and political advocacy. From Tommy Smith and John Carlos raising their fists at the 1968 Olympics to Colin Kaepernick kneeling during the national anthem nearly 5 decades later, Ali had demonstrated that athletes could be more than entertainers. They could be agents of social change. In black communities across America, Ali's defiance became legendary. His willingness to say, "I'm not your slave," to a white official in 1967, when such language could have resulted in violence, represented a new kind of black masculinity, unapologetic, dignified, and unwilling to compromise on matters of principle. Julian Bond, the civil rights leader, once explained Ali's significance. When Ali refused to take that step forward, he was doing more than just refusing military service. He was standing up for black people, saying that we would no longer be the compliant Negro. We would no longer bow our heads and accept whatever was handed to us. Ali's global impact was equally profound. In Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, he became an icon of resistance against Western imperialism. When he traveled to Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, for the Foreman fight in 1974, the chants of "Ali Bomaye," "Ali, kill him," reflected not just support for a boxer but embrace of a man who had stood against American military power. Nelson Mandela, imprisoned on Robben Island during Ali's fight against the draft, later revealed that news of Ali's stand had given him and other political prisoners hope. "When we learned about his refusal to fight in Vietnam," Mandela said, "it made us realize that we were not alone in our struggle." On June 3, 2016, when Muhammad Ali died at age 74, the world mourned not just a great boxer, but a man whose moral courage had changed history. His funeral in Louisville, Kentucky, was attended by religious leaders from multiple faiths, world leaders, celebrities, and thousands of ordinary people whose lives he had touched. Former President Bill Clinton, delivering a eulogy, captured the essence of Ali's legacy. He decided at a very young age to write his own life story. He decided that he would not be ever disempowered. In the years since his death, as America has continued to wrestle with issues of racial justice, religious freedom, and the limits of state power, Ali's stand has taken on renewed relevance. His simple declaration, "I'm not your slave," continues to resonate as a powerful assertion of human dignity in the face of institutional pressure. Perhaps the most telling measure of how completely Ali's legacy has been rehabilitated came in 2005, when President George W. Bush, the son of the president who had sent Ali on that diplomatic mission to Iraq, awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, America's highest civilian honor. As Bush placed the medal around Ali's neck, he said, "The American people are proud to call Muhammad Ali one of our own." It was a remarkable statement about a man who, 4 decades earlier, had been condemned as un-American for refusing to fight in Vietnam. The journey from traitor to national hero was complete. Yet Ali himself never sought this rehabilitation. He never apologized for his stand or softened his critique of American racism and militarism. Instead, the country had come to recognize what Ali had known all along, that true patriotism sometimes requires standing against your government when conscience demands it. In his autobiography, Ali wrote words that serve as a fitting epitaph for a man whose greatest fight took place not in the ring, but in a Houston induction center. "I would like to be remembered as a man who won the heavyweight title 3 times, who was humorous, and who treated everyone right. As a man who never looked down on those who looked up to him, and who helped as many people as he could. As a man who stood up for his beliefs no matter what. As a man who tried to unite all humankind through faith and love." When Muhammad Ali declared, "I'm not your slave," to that white official in 1967, he could not have known the full consequences of his defiance, the lost years, the financial hardship, the public vilification, but he also could not have foreseen how completely history would vindicate him, how his moment of defiance would inspire generations, and how his sacrifice would elevate him from champion to legend. In the end, Ali's greatest victory wasn't winning back his heavyweight title. It was winning the respect of a world that came to understand that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply to stand their ground and say, "This is who I am, this is what I believe, and I will not be moved." If you've made it this far and felt every word, don't leave without subscribing. I tell these stories with my heart in my hands to reach people like you, who feel, who get emotional, who truly live. If this touched you, give something back. Comment. Subscribe. Come be part of this family with me until the next video.